nothing to me.
All right. Page 456. 18. Pantius, AD 180. Let me make sure. Okay. Well, it could not be expected that Pantius, if he wrote the Gospel of Matthew, would admit the fact, yet if we had the account of his travels in India and his discovery there as claimed of an original Gospel of Matthew, we might have at least some light thrown upon the origin of that Gospel. 19. The Chronicles of Hegesippus, AD 185. Hegesippus was the first church historian. He traveled over nearly all Christendom for the express purpose of obtaining information and then wrote the history of the church from the beginning to his own time. This work is lost or destroyed. The extent of the loss cannot be overestimated. Eusebius was the next historian, writing 140 years afterward. He had the history of Hegesippus before him. After referring to the death of James and the statement of Clement that James was thrown from a wing of the temple and beaten to death with a club, he says, Hegesippus also, who flourished nearest the days of the apostles in the 5th book of his commentaries, gives the most accurate account of him thus. Here follows a lengthy account of the death of James. Eusebius then adds, such is the more ample testimony of Hegesippus, in which he fully coincides with Clement. Again, Eusebius gives an account of the grandchildren of Judas, called the Lord's brother, who were examined before the emperor Domitian. He concludes as follows, such is the statement of Hegesippus. Again, speaking of the martyrdom of Simon, 2nd bishop of Jerusalem, he says, to this the same Hegesippus bears testimony, whose words we have already so often quoted. He then quotes several passages further from the same author. Subsequently referring to classical writers, he says, among these, Hegesippus holds a distinguished rank, many of whose writings we have already quoted, where we have given some things as he has delivered them from apostolic tradition. This author compiled in 5 books the plain tradition of the apostolic doctrine in a most simple style of composition, and clearly shows the time in which he lived, where he writes respecting those who began to erect idols, etc. Here follows a quotation from Hegesippus concerning the erection of cenotaphs, temples, etc. Again, in the same book, he says, Hegesippus, indeed, in the 5 books of commentaries that have come down to us, has left a most complete record of his own views. In these, he states that he conversed with most of the bishops when he traveled to Rome, and that he received the same doctrine from all. We may also add what he says after some observations on the epistle of Clement to the Corinthians. He then quotes Hegesippus concerning the church of Corinth. Continuing, Eusebius speaks of Hegesippus coming to Rome and of the Roman bishops, and Anicetus, Soter, and Eleutherus in every succession. However, says Hegesippus, and in every city the doctrine prevails according to what is declared by the law and the prophet and the Lord. He then quotes what Hegesippus says concerning the beginning of heresies and the ancient heresies prevalent among the Jews. He also speaks of many other matters, says Eusebius, which we have in part already quoted and introduced in their appropriate places. He also states some particulars from the Gospel of Hebrews and from the Sirach, and particularly from the Hebrew language, showing that he himself was a convert from the Hebrews. Other matters he also records is taken from the unwritten tradition of the Jews. And not only he, but Irenaeus also, and the whole body of the ancients, called the Proverbs of Solomon wisdom, comprehending every virtue. Also, in discoursing on the books called apocryphal, he relates that some of them were forged in his day by some of the heretics. From the foregoing, it will be seen how much of the history of Hegesippus is incorporated into that of Eusebius. A few meager items of comparatively no historical value, the manner of the death of James, the examination of a few individuals before Domitian, the martyrdom of Simon, the worshipping of idols, the journey to Rome, and a few words concerning the commencement of heresies. Not a word of what was important to be known of the history of the progress of the church and of the doctrines which had prevailed of the controversies between the Jewish and Gentile Christians, of the history of Paul and Peter, and of the founding of the Church of Rome, and above all, of the history of the Gospels and New Testament books, which Hegesippus found in circulation, showing by whom they were written and how they had been preserved. So far as can be learned, Hegesippus was profoundly silent concerning the four Gospels and spoke only of the Gospel of the Hebrews. The history of Hegesippus must have been written after the accession of Eleutherus, Bishop of Rome, in probably about AD 185. This was, if we have read history aright, in the infancy of the four Gospels. Whether Hegesippus met with them, and if so, what estimate he formed of them in comparison with the Gospel of the Hebrews, is a question of the utmost importance, but one upon which Eusebius is silent. Since Eusebius had the history of Hegesippus in his possession, why did he not take measures to have it preserved, or else incorporate it into his own history, the most important portions of it, and particularly the evidence, if any, in favor of the four Gospels? According to Eusebius, Hegesippus said that in every city the doctrine prevailed according to the law and the prophets and the Lord, and that he received the same doctrine from all. Eusebius would have his readers believe that the doctrine of a Jewish Christian of the 2nd century was precisely the same as that which prevailed in every city. Again, Eusebius says that Hegesippus derived his information concerning apostolic doctrine from tradition. Is that consistent with the existence of Gospels which were everywhere received in the church as authoritative? Such Gospels would have been superior to and would have taken the place of all tradition concerning apostolic doctrine. 20. Commentaries of Heraclian, AD 190. It is claimed that Heraclian wrote commentaries on Luke and John. Clement of Alexandria quotes Heraclian in such a way as to indicate that he had commented on Luke or Marcion or on some other gospel containing the sayings of Christ. The commentaries on John are inferred from some passages of Origen. If these commentaries existed, their loss is irreparable. 21. The writings of Serapion, AD 190. These of which we have but a brief extract in Eusebius would have enlightened us further in regard to the transaction at Rossus. From Serapion, we could have learned something of the four Gospels which he was substituting in place of the Gospel of Peter. He could inform us how long the four Gospels had been in circulation, where he obtained them, what other Gospels he had been obliged to suppress to make way for them, and whether he was acting under the direction of the Church of Rome. His writings have perished. 22. Clement of Alexandria. It is said to have composed a work especially upon the scriptures which were considered authoritative. Eusebius says that in the work called Hypotypesis, Clement gave abridged accounts of all the canonical scriptures. This work has perished, while most of the other more important writings of Clement have been preserved. This ends the list of works of the 2nd century, either written expressly concerning the Gospels and New Testament books in circulation at that time, or which would have thrown more or less light upon the subject. More than 50 books by more than 20 authors. Nearly everything written concerning the Gospels to the year 325, and all the copies of the Gospels themselves to the same period are lost or destroyed. All right.